God bless America. Hello, everybody. I am the Talk Radio Protege. This is the Protege program, and we're talking about the Las Vegas shooting again because Jimmy Kimmel decided he is going to be a political activist again, as if he had ever convinced any of us of anything otherwise. So let's get straight into it. Where are my notes? I've got a full page or two. We're going to go through this entire video. I, again, wish I could show it to you, but I don't have unlimited data for the purposes of giving you the video in its context, but I do have my notes. We will be going through this. I plan on time stamping my video. Planning on putting a link to Jimmy Kimmel's video in the description. So you should be able to go there and find all of these blurbs that I've given you. The parts that I've cut are cut because they're not important for the discussion that we're going to have, and that is mostly about gun control. And the title for this video is going to be Jimmy Kimmel Blissfully Ignorant on gun rights. Unfortunately, that means that the viewers are going to be ignorant on these things as well. Now, Jimmy begins with an emotional recounting of the events, and I don't fault him for being emotional. I don't want to make fun of him for being emotional, for crying on national television. I think that that's all good and fine. Jimmy has a personal tie to Las Vegas. Apparently, he grew up there. It was his hometown. Fine. He makes one statement about the shooter maybe having a voice in his head. To this point, according to CNN, we still don't know what his motive was, so it's not 100% that he was mentally unstable, that he had a voice in his head. Maybe that's just Jimmy being metaphorical about the shooter feeling a need to do this violent thing. At 2:35 on the dot, politics are injected. He can't go 5 minutes talking about Las Vegas without getting political. So here we go. 2:43 to 2:52. Jimmy says, when someone with a beard attacks, we take precautions. Now that's oversimplifying the situation just a little bit, Jimmy. It's not just the beard that we have an objection to. It's their same ideology. It's the very similar area of the world that these people are coming from that are attacking and committing these acts of terrorism that we want to take actions to prevent. The appearance is coincidental. ISIS has been trying to claim responsibility for this shooter, so this might be the first white ISIS terrorist, which would make him, an essentially non-Western threat if he's bringing his influence from Islam. When it comes to building the wall, implementing travel bans, those are two things that Jimmy name dropped specifically. Non-U.S. citizens have no constitutional rights. They don't have a right to travel to the United States of America. They don't have a right to enter the United States of America. That's totally different than banning all guns, which Jimmy's not going to suggest in this video, but the solutions that he are going to suggest would not have stopped this action from taking place. Moving on, 2:52 to 3:09, Jimmy states, American buys a gun, Second Amendment, blah, blah, blah. The founders wanted us to have AK-47s. Yes. to quote what Steven Crowder does sometimes when people say something that, we just totally agree with. Yes. In fact, I mentioned this in the video, in a recent video. I didn't look it up, but I did look it up today. This is an American letter of marque signed by President James Madison, where he commissioned private citizens, not members of the military in any capacity at all, private citizens owning a private sailing vessel to mount that sailing vessel with 18 weapons of war. Those are cannons for those of you in Rio Linda. Weapons of war. The Democrats and the left love to talk about weapons of war and it not being appropriate for private citizens to own weapons of war. But the equivalent for the signing of the Constitution, we had muskets, which everybody says, yeah, the Second Amendment was about muskets, and we have cannons, which are the weapons of war. The United States government actually gave weapons of war to private citizens and asked private citizens to carry out somewhat warlike actions against the British freaking Empire. Yes, the founders wanted Americans to have whatever weapons they wanted. While that might sound like a controversial opinion, this was the opinion of the freaking founders of the United States of America. Moving on, 309 to 325. Kimmel talks about Orlando, Newton, a.k.a. Sandy Hook, Aurora, a.k.a. Dark Knight Movie Theater, and San Bernardino. He says that these attacks were carried out by automatic or semi-automatic weapons, that these weapons are designed to kill many people very quickly. He says specifically that these are not designed for self-defense. First of all, if you know what weapons were used in those 4 attacks, you would say, yes, it's true that it was automatic or semi-automatic weapons, if by automatic or semi-automatic you mean no automatic weapons whatsoever. In fact, this attack in Las Vegas is the first mass shooting that I know of anyway, where a weapon that functioned as a semi-automatic weapon, it can't even be called a semi-automatic weapon, it just functioned I got a little tongue-tied there. It wasn't even an actual automatic weapon, it simply functioned. It was heavily modified to function as an automatic weapon. This was the first attack in which one was used. Orlando, semi-automatic rifle, semi-automatic handgun. Sandy Hook, semi-automatic rifle. Aurora, pump-action shotgun, semi-automatic rifle and handgun. San Bernardino, semi-automatic pistols and rifles. Not one freaking automatic weapon! These weapons are illegal for the average American to own. You have to have a Class 3 firearms license to own an automatic weapon. These weapons are not just owned by all kinds of people. Look up Don Lemon saying that it's easy to get an automatic weapon. It's very, very difficult. You have to go through an incredibly intrusive background check, strenuous background check, before you can even be given a Class 3 firearms license, and then you have to find a fully automatic weapon to purchase. And they're not just carried in, the average gun store. Second of all, my second point of contention with this bit of the video, who are you, Jimmy Kimmel, to say what weapons are needed or not needed for self-defense? Have you fired a weapon in self-defense? Have you, Jimmy Kimmel, fired a weapon, period? I kind of think that the answer is no. But I, thankfully, have never been in a self-defense situation. I do not know anyone off the top of my head that has had to use a weapon in a self-defense situation. But there are millions of Americans that have had to use weapons in a self-defense situation. And weapons that are designed to kill a lot of people quickly are perhaps the best weapons for self-defense. The weapons that it doesn't take a lot of skill or prior training or even awareness to use to target an assailant are the best weapons to defend yourself with. A musket is an absolute terrible weapon to use for self-defense. You get one shot, and if you screw up, you're dead. Revolvers are a little bit better. Single-action revolvers are probably the next step up from a musket, at least to the average person that knows nothing about guns. And the motor functions, the mental capacity that it takes to work a single-action revolver effectively to repel an assailant makes a revolver an effective musket, an effective single-shot weapon. The next step up, you have the pump-action shotguns, I guess, are the next easiest thing to use. And shotguns are incredibly unwieldy. You can't just carry a shotgun, especially considering it's illegal to carry a sawed-off shotgun. Those are Class 2 firearms. You have to have a Class 2 firearms license to own those weapons. The next easiest thing is then semi-automatic firearms, semi-automatic rifles, semi-automatic pistols. This is the easiest weapons to use in a self-defense situation. Pistols especially, because you can get what are called hollow point ammunition that are designed to not penetrate anything. They're designed to go into something and transfer all of the energy from that bullet into that person, and when you shoot a person, it's supposed to knock them down. It's supposed to stop the assault. Those are also safer to use because they're going to, if they hit a wall, they're not going to penetrate that wall and go through and possibly hit someone on the other side. So semi-automatic weapons that are designed to kill a lot of people quickly are actually the best weapons for self-defense. No thank you, Jimmy Kimmel, for spreading that little bit of misinformation. Now, moving on. 325, 335, he says, why is a person allowed to have 10 guns? Well, it's because we have this thing called the Second Amendment. You mentioned it earlier. It's this pesky thing that allows Americans to keep and bear arms. And law-abiding citizens are allowed to own guns. I mentioned in an earlier video, in my fake conspiracy theory video, that some people just like to collect and have a lot of guns. They may not shoot them all, they may just like to have them. It's not illegal. This is not Minority Reportlandia. This is not Marvel Comics world where you can be arrested before you commit a crime. People actually have to commit a crime, no matter how evil a person is. If freaking Adolf Hitler lived in modern America, he would actually have to commit a crime before he could be arrested. This is the world that we live in. You cannot convict someone of a crime they haven't committed. Moving on now, Jimmy Kimmel name drops the NRA and the influence that they have over Congress 3 times. He specifically influences the money that the NRA spends. And I, for one, personally think that Jimmy Kimmel has picked the wrong fight when it comes to the NRA, specifically referencing the money that the NRA spends trying to influence Congress. Let's find NRA on this chart. This is from Open Secrets. They list all of the organizations that donate money to national campaigns. And as you can see, the NRA is not in the top 10. They're not in the top 20. I'm going to save us a little bit of time. They're not in the top 50. I may not have... yeah, I didn't prepare this page. This is election cycle 2016. We might just have to read through here and see if we can find the NRA. I read the all-time chart. I know where the NRA falls on the all-time chart. They're not even on the chart for 2016. They're not in the top 50 for 2016. On the all-time chart, they're number 90 freaking 2. On the all-time chart, the NRA has donated 10% of the top all-time donator. In the all-time chart, 5 of the top 10 donators are labor unions. In the all-time chart, 8 of the top 10 donators donated exclusively 100% to Democrat organizations. In the top 10 all-time chart, 1 of the donators donated to Republican campaigns, and it actually happens to be Las Vegas Sands, number 3 on the 2016 chart. In the all-time chart, the dreaded Koch brothers aren't even in the top 20. Jimmy Kimmel does not have a freaking clue what he's talking about when he talks about the NRA donating money to Congress. The NRA has freaking nothing on labor unions. The NRA doesn't even have anything on Democrat donors. 92! You picked the wrong fight, Jimmy Kimmel. Next up, Jimmy Kimmel talks about several specific issues where he would like to see more stringent gun control enacted. He talks about mental illness, he talks about the gun show loophole that doesn't exist, and he talks about the no-fly list. And I want to address these things. You know, the mental illness thing gets brought up a lot. People like to say people with mental illnesses shouldn't be allowed to buy firearms. And I know, because I read a lot of NRA stuff, I listen to a lot of people talk about gun control. The reason that that we don't like the mental illness angle is because it turns doctors into the purveyors of your Second Amendment rights. If you can find a doctor that can label someone with a mental illness, they suddenly are no longer allowed to own a firearm. In fact, many soldiers that go and fight and have their limbs blown off and endure and witness horrendous things overseas in wars, serving this country, are not allowed to buy firearms because some doctor somewhere has slapped a mental illness label on this person. It's extremely, relatively easy to be given a mental illness diagnosis, and relatively very difficult to have that diagnosis removed. So it's a very difficult issue, a very hard line to walk when it comes to mental illness. There needs to be a lot of safeguards in place if we were ever to impose a mental illness condition on the Second Amendment. I personally would not like to see it happen, but if it had to happen, if we had to find a way to bar mentally unstable people from owning a firearm, I would say you need to find some kind of some number. I don't know what the number needs to be. Maybe it needs to be 3, maybe it needs to be 5, maybe it needs to be 10 psychiatrists that would all have to agree and diagnose a person with the same mental illness and all say this person is not fit to own a gun. They would need to be from all across the country, all kinds of political influences. I would not feel comfortable giving any single doctor the power to say this person is not mentally fit to own a firearm. But that's just me. Second, the gun show loophole. I took the time to look up gun laws so that you don't have to, because Jimmy Kimmel didn't care to look up this information and share it with you. But here are the gun laws. First of all, there's your Title II weapons. I mentioned earlier that short-barreled rifles that sawed-off shotguns are illegal, and there you go. They're considered Title II weapons. It's illegal for the average citizen to own them. The Federal Firearms Act, 1938, this is a big one. Gun manufacturers must have a federal firearms license in order to sell firearms. Gun manufacturers, importers, and persons in the business of selling firearms. That means your firearm salespeople, your firearm distributors, those kinds of people. And then the Gun Control Act is another one. Interstate commerce of firearms, heavily regulated by the Gun Control Act of 1968. Mostly it means that individuals are not allowed to sell across state lines. Interstate firearm transfers are illegal unless federally licensed firearm dealers are moving the firearms. Undetectable Firearms Act. Firearms that are not detectable by metal detectors are illegal. The Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. We're going to read this a little bit more because this blurb doesn't give enough information. So you can see that I clicked on the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, and you go over here to the actual act and you read into the provisions, and it says that the Brady Bill requires that background checks be conducted on individuals before a firearm may be purchased from a federally licensed dealer. This means that any individuals that buys a firearm from any federally licensed dealer, anywhere, at any time, must receive a background check. Go watch Steven Crowder's video on the gun show loophole. It's brilliant. He talks to all kinds of dealers, pawn shops, dealers. He goes to gun shows. He goes to them in-store. None of them sell automatic weapons in the first place, and none of them will sell you a firearm without making you take a background check first. It's incredible. The misinformation about the gun shows and the gun show loophole is incredible. The gun show loophole just doesn't exist. That's the simple truth about it. When it comes to private sales, I don't think they should be regulated at all. Those are private individuals. If you're not in the business of making money on firearm sales, then it's none of the government's business what you do with your firearms, as long as you're not, violating other people's, human and constitutional rights using those firearms. And the no-fly list. Kimmel mentions the no-fly list. The no-fly list is an executive arbitrary list that it's incredibly easy to get on and incredibly difficult to get off. You don't have to be told that you're on the no-fly list. You're not allowed to defend yourself from being added to the no-fly list. The no-fly list is a terrible, terrible metric to use to determine if someone should own a firearm. Kimmel says, I think I'm quoting verbatim, but I'm probably just paraphrasing. These people are not allowed to fly, but they're allowed to own a firearm. That doesn't make sense to me. Well, it makes sense to me because there's a constitutional right to own a firearm, but there's not a constitutional right to fly. If you can't fly, you can still go places. You might not be able to get to another country quickly, but you can still get in a car and drive wherever you want. You can still take a bus wherever you want. You can still walk wherever you want. You can still take a train wherever you want. If you're banned from owning a firearm, there's no other way for you to get a firearm. And frankly, it should be a little more difficult than somebody randomly deciding that you shouldn't be able to fly. Then it should just be a little more difficult than that for you to not be able to buy a firearm anymore. 710 to 712, Kimmel says, no American needs an M16. Well, Kimmel, who are you to say? Who are you to say that an American doesn't need a fully automatic weapon? Who are you to say that American doesn't need a quote-unquote assault rifle? Fake buzzword, by the way. Who are you to say that American doesn't need whatever kind of weapon? I would not be surprised if you not only do not own any firearms or that you have never shot a single firearm. I would not be surprised if you have guards on your studio that are armed to the teeth, prepared to protect you and all of the people that are in your studio from any kind of violent assault. And yet you would prevent regular Americans that don't have millions of dollars like you do from purchasing whatever firearms they feel necessary to defend themselves. Who the heck are you to say who needs what kinds of firearms, Jimmy Kimmel? And then finally, Jimmy Kimmel decides to compare apples to oranges, and he talks about two fires that happened in the 80s in Las Vegas that were particularly impactful on him because apparently he witnessed one of them. He talks about the MGM Grand Fire in 1980, which was an accident, force of nature. He talks about the Hilton Fire in 1981, which is arson and was a human choice. What is there to say about this one? First of all, there's no constitutional right for construction workers to build buildings that are susceptible to being burned down. Fire is not the same as a firearm. I know that might be confusing for Mr. Kimmel because they have the same words in them. But really, it's just comparing apples to oranges. I really don't know what else there is to say about it. You're comparing a force of nature, which in some situations cannot be controlled by man, to a mechanical device that is always under the control of men. Sometimes fires are set by people for the purposes of killing people, and that's terrible and that's tragic. We don't ban fire because people use it to kill people. Fires happen on accident. We don't ban fires because a fire happened and killed a bunch of people and burned a bunch of stuff. Fires can happen whether or not people are even around. A fire can occur if there are no people on the continent. A firearm literally cannot go off if a human does not pull the trigger. It's not even comparing apples and oranges. It's comparing a supernova to a grapefruit. It's literally not the same thing. I don't know what else to say about this. I don't know what else you want me to say about this. Jimmy is totally ignorant in the realm of firearms. As I've said multiple times in this video, I wouldn't be surprised if Jimmy Kimmel not only does not own a firearm, that he has never fired a firearm. I wouldn't be surprised if the only time Jimmy Kimmel has laid eyes on a firearm was in pictures and movies. It would not take my breath away. That's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed as I as I say, go watch the video. Go make sure I have not taken Mr. Kimmel out of context. Go watch Steven Crowder's videos that he's done on the Second Amendment and on gun rights. He has done a lot of undercover journalism. He's done a lot more legwork than I have. He's done an excellent job. I've just attempted to address this one video by Jimmy Kimmel. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate the support of my viewers that have been watching for a few months now. Again, thank you for watching. Have a fantastic evening. I'll see you in the next video. Good night, and God bless.